There are days that can change the trajectory of our lives, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Today, I want to share with you one of those times in my life. Thanks for watching today. I'm Peggy Oliveira, trauma therapist and survivor of childhood trauma. That day for me was the anniversary of my mom's death, Christmas Day. My children were with their father, their biological father, for the holiday, in part because it was a hard day for me, and I thought that they would be better off somewhere else. So on that day, I got into an argument with my husband. Nothing significant. I don't even remember what it was about, and I didn't remember even shortly after. But it was just one of those times that I was really vulnerable. And on that day, we were arguing about something. Again, I don't remember exactly what happened, but it created a lot of reactivity within me. I felt intense hopelessness, fear, uncertainty, shame, all of it. I felt it all, and there wasn't any specific reason. It's just that vulnerability, that everything that makes us vulnerable increases the depth of that vulnerability. And because I felt completely overwhelmed by the experience, I started self-harming. And my husband became concerned. I mean, of course, he was not happy either, but he was concerned about me, rightfully so. And he called 911. I had locked myself in the bathroom. I wouldn't come out. And he called 911. I was mortified. I was so incredibly embarrassed and ashamed. And he told me that he called and he said I needed to take the phone. They needed to talk to me. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed the phone and I hung it up. And as 911 operators are trained, the police showed up at my door, which furthered the embarrassment and shame. And I was so angry at my husband, so angry at him. I felt betrayed. So, of course, the police asked if everything was okay. I said it was. I'm sure that they could tell that I had been crying. They didn't believe me, which in a way is really kind of a good thing. Because there could have been any number of things happening inside of that house. So they wanted to talk to me, and I think they also wanted to talk to my husband. I assured them that I was all right, and they left. But I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed. I was wondering, what the neighbors were thinking, and I was feeling betrayed that my husband had called 911 and made me feel all this embarrassment and shame. I really hated him in that moment. And of course, hate is not the opposite of love, but I felt really betrayed by him. But he said, "You need help." And as much as I hated to admit it, as embarrassed as I was to admit it, he was right. So the next business day, I contacted the local rape crisis center. It was not that I felt like I needed rape crisis services at all, but I had heard somebody speak from that program in a class that I was taking, and I knew that they offered referrals, so I called there asking for a referral. And the woman said, "Well, are you a survivor of abuse?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but that's not what I'm seeking services for, or not what I'm wanting help with." And she said, "Well, that's okay, but if you're a survivor, you can come here for counseling, and it's free." And at the time, that was very beneficial to me that it was free. So I said, "Well, okay," and I set up the appointment. That was the beginning of a journey I never even knew was possible. Nobody talked about healing at that time, nor did I think I had been affected by what happened to me. I knew that I had been abused. I never blocked it out. I knew that I felt so much shame around it, but I thought the shame was deserved. There were all kinds of reasons that I believed that I deserved to feel ashamed. Reasons that I believed that it was my fault that it happened. I had very intentionally and very deliberately said to myself many times that I wasn't affected by it, which furthered the shame. Because whenever I acted in a way that I felt bad about, that I felt ashamed about, that put me in a position that created even more difficulty, I told myself it wasn't related to that. It was just that I was stupid. I was bad. It was proof that I deserved all those things happening. But when I started my counseling, when I started going, again, I didn't know what I was really going for, but it was at a rape crisis center. And I had acknowledged that I had been abused. So that's what we talked about on that first night. I had no idea what to expect. But she said that there was going to be a support group for survivors. And I was torn. Oh, well, that sounds kind of intriguing, kind of interesting. But at the same time, what the hell are you talking about? I'm not going to go into a group of other people and talk about this. I had shared it with a few people, but didn't really talk about it, just shared that a couple of things had happened. But I decided to do it. Something nudged me in that direction. And that was shortly after I started my counseling. And I remember on that first night, and you may have heard me share this part of the story before, that first night of group counseling, I think there were 5 or 6 of us in the group. And I was so surprised at what I was hearing other people share, because it was so similar to everything that I had thought, felt, and believed. And here were these other women who had different lives than I did, but we had this thing in common. Some of us had different abusers. Some of us had one abuser. Some of us had more. There were so many things that I was surprised to learn that I wasn't the only one. And there was so much healing that happened just on that one night. I remember leaving there that night, walking out to my car, and actually saying to myself, literally saying this to myself, I think even out loud, why isn't anybody talking about this? If people just talked about it, we wouldn't have to feel all of this. We wouldn't have to believe that we're alone and that we're the only ones. Of course, I didn't know it at the time, but that planted the seed for everything that came after. It was a long road. There were times that I wanted to give up, times that I had no idea why I was really doing it, because I found that I still struggled. I lost touch with those people in the group. I actually quit counseling. After the group ended, I don't know if it was maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but this is kind of another lesson that I learned really later, probably even after becoming a therapist. But on the last night of group, my counselor, who was one of the facilitators of the group, said to me afterward that she was so glad that I came, and however she said it, left me with the idea that, okay, the group is over, so I guess I'm done. And I was confused, and I thought, there was a part of me that but wait a minute, isn't there still more to do? I didn't say that, but I thought it. And then I thought, oh, I guess I'm healed. I guess I'm done. So I never went back. That was a huge lesson for me as a therapist. That was a huge lesson. So I didn't go back. I thought that was it. I thought that I was supposed to be done after that. So I took what I learned there. I took that experience of recognizing that I wasn't alone, that actually so much of how I felt and believed, or what I believed and how I struggled, that the majority of the women in that group were really the same. For example, recognizing that being abused by more than one person is not as unusual as I thought it was. I thought I was the only one. That the ways that we coped, and it wasn't really talked about in that way, but kind of like our behaviors, that I wasn't the only one. And I thought that I was. I really believed that I was the only one who acted in those ways, that behaved in those ways in the context of a relationship, and how I showed up in the world. And even with my children, I thought it was just me. And I learned that it wasn't. And that helped me come back to something concrete many times, because my healing journey took a long time after that. I doubted myself all the time. I didn't believe that it wasn't my fault. But I could go back and look at these other women that I had this experience with in group and know that it wasn't their fault. We had similar stories. And while it wasn't really a conscious process, I was able to say to myself, if it wasn't their fault and it was so similar, maybe it's possible that it wasn't my fault. Now, it took a lot of practice of saying that before I ever actually believed it. But I took those experiences with me. And as I continued predominantly on my educational path, and I began to understand things more, because I majored in my undergraduate in social work and sociology, and then in my master's program, social work. And so each step of the way, as I learned more about the internal aspect of our lives, the external experiences that we have in our lives, I learned more about myself. I learned more about the implication of different types of experiences. And while it wasn't conscious, I was internalizing that all along. So that became a significant part of my own healing experience. And then, after becoming a therapist, working with people that were not necessarily solely trauma survivors, or at least sexual trauma, I worked with children who had experienced trauma, and seeing even more examples of how those things tend to play out, which really helped affirm that this is normal. This is a normal reaction. I still blamed myself. I still felt shame. But on a cognitive level, I was really beginning to see and trust that that was true. I was really taking that in and seeing how the various experiences created a similar lived experience in terms of what we believe about who we are. And then, well, actually in my master's program, I decided to go back to counseling again, because I thought, if I'm going to be working with people, and I had no intention at that time to be a therapist, but if I'm going to be trying to help people, I need to make sure, basically, that I had my shit together. I said that to myself, like I needed to make sure that I know what my stuff is and that I've worked through it. So I went back to counseling again. And then in my master's internship is when I started working with children who had experienced different forms of trauma. And then working in rape crisis, I really began to see what it meant to be a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. how the ideas that we hold are reinforced over time, how deeply we hold on to those ideas, the challenges that we face when we try to heal. Really understanding the impact of shame. And working with survivors in those earlier years, hearing about their shame and how they held on to it really helped me release the shame that I held on to. And that's part of the reason that I do these videos. Because we need to hear things time and time again. We need to hear it in different ways, sometimes from different voices. Every time we do, it settles in a little bit deeper. And that's what happened for me in my own healing process, in my educational process, and in my work. Every client that I've ever had has helped me learn a little bit more, reaffirmed my own intuitive sense of healing and what that means and how we get there. That day that my husband called 911 was a day that I felt such incredible shame and really felt pretty hopeless. I had felt incredibly hopeless before and even suicidal before. But that day, it kind of all came crashing down. And again, I hated him in that moment, but that is what led me ultimately to seeking counseling. Not because I thought I need to heal from this. And again, not even because I identified my trauma as what I needed help with. I actually went thinking, my husband deserves a better wife and my kids deserve a better mom. That it wasn't fair to them. Fortunately, I began over time to recognize that how I was living, how I was feeling, the shame that I was carrying was not what was meant for my life. I truly, and I've said this before, to think back to where I was, how I felt, what I believed about who I was, I never could have imagined feeling the way that I do now. That doesn't mean that I'm always happy. It doesn't mean that things never go wrong. Just recently, I noticed that after bringing on a new VA that I was struggling with some things, and just last week recognized what was going on there. And it wasn't about the VA, it wasn't about the work. It was about it bringing up aspects of feeling that maybe my business, and therefore me, might not have been worthy. And once I realized that, I'm able to deal with that, which is why we can't heal what we deny, right, is wounded. My life isn't perfect, and healing isn't about perfection, and it's not about always being happy. It's about believing that you're worthy of being happy, of deserving good things, even when the things around you feel like they're falling apart. It's being able to trust in the goodness within you and yourself. It's about allowing yourself to be seen so that you can build connection that helps you feel and trust that you're worthy and not alone. I had no idea what was going to happen after that day or the day that I began counseling. But I'm here today sharing this with you because I took a risk. which if you're watching this, you're taking a risk right now. Putting one foot in front of the other, even when you're not sure where it's leading you, but not giving up. The life that you've dared to dream possible for yourself. Even if you don't let yourself sit there very long, but you've had glimpses here or there of what you would love to see happen for yourself or your life, how you'd like to feel. You've had glimpses of that. There's a good chance you've shut it down quickly, saying to yourself, that could never happen. I don't deserve that. I'm not strong enough, not worthy enough. That's not true. Those are lies. Lies that you needed to believe for a period of time. Lies that were formed to help protect you ultimately. And they served a purpose. But it's time to heal. You deserve that. You're capable of that. Thank you so much for being a part of this community, for taking a risk, for being vulnerable, for taking your own path. Remember, the struggle that you experience now on any given day is not the totality of your life. It is not what you are meant for. You are meant for beauty, for peace, for connection, and going after the things that you desire and dream about.